good morning, good afternoon to those that are joining across the world. Thank you very much for taking time to join or rewatch this webinar today. By way of a brief introduction, I'm Ross, obviously. Have been at WorkBuzz for coming up to 6 years or so now, supporting lots of organisations to come to the WorkBuzz family to improve their or start their employee listening journeys, whether it's deep dive surveys, pulse surveys, all kinds of surveys. And I had the pleasure of working with Dive for a few years or so now, through a couple of different journeys, and that's what we're going to cover off today. But do you want to give a quick introduction as well, Di?
Yeah, so I'm Di. I'm currently the People Director at Lifetime Training Group, which is a UK-based independent training provider. I've been here a year, and we've literally just introduced WorkBuzz to do our surveys. But previously, I've worked with WorkBuzz, my last employer, which was a UK and Europe-based hospitality company. And we used WorkBuzz for about 5 years. So I've worked with WorkBuzz for about 5-6 years in total. And that was providing all our surveys across the UK and Europe for our people there.
Thank you very much. And we'll dive into both those different journeys as we go through today. I think two slightly different journeys given experience with WorkBuzz previously for the second time round, but cover all of that off today. And to kick things off, Hayley Creedy, hiding in the background, I think has a poll for us to start in terms of where people are at in what they want to learn around today. Hayley, should we launch the poll and see if there's any feedback in terms of what people want to cover? Looks like we've got the poll up there. So for anybody joining, if you want to talk about the challenge you're facing when getting engagement solutions into your organization, we'll make sure all of this is covered off from some feedback from Di today. We've got a few ideas around influencing stakeholders. We'll make sure that's all covered through. Proving ROI, always a fun one, and different areas to cover off. Understanding a business case that suits your organization, that's really important in terms of tailoring that to make sure different stakeholders are involved. And a couple of votes for other as well. If you voted for other, please feel free to drop into the chat and we'll make sure it's covered off in the next sort of half an hour, 40 minutes or so. Cool. So pretty even split across the poll here. So influencing stakeholders, writing a business case that suits your organization, elements of proving ROI, and a little bit around other, which hopefully we'll get some comments on as we go through. Let's kick off. Oh, we've got a little comment come through, so I'm just going to read that. Key stakeholders, head in the sand approach. They think engagement is low and don't want the actual metric. Di will make sure we cover that one through. I know we've had some challenges around this, thanks to Jeff. We'll make sure Di covers off some areas around supporting key stakeholders when it comes to that. Shall we start with journey one, Di? So as mentioned, Di's been on sort of two purchasing journeys when it comes to WorkBuzz, but it'd be good to learn firstly around the journey of selection from a standing start, but also on the second time rounds when you knew a little bit more around the markets as well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so first time round, we didn't run an engagement survey at all at the time that I was proposing introducing it. So it was a full-on cost investment from ground zero. And we were introducing a new group company purpose, vision and values. So that was the leverage, that was the opportunity to then introduce a survey that would help us measure our impact and alignment around the new group vision, purpose and values, and it sort of grew from there. And whilst I'd worked in companies before that had surveys, I didn't realise how many options there were actually around surveys. So I did do a lot of exploration at that point around the types of surveys, the frequency of the survey. I'd had experience of doing those big surveys that are attached to awards before, and certainly had learned those were very cumbersome. And I knew what I didn't want, I just didn't know what I needed. So yeah, had to spend a lot of time speaking to lots of different providers and being really clear on what we needed for our business. And that's how I ended up working with WorkBuzz, who were obviously the best at that time.
Thank you very much for the mini plug there. I think the initial market exploration piece is so important just to understand the whole market. There's lots of different types of surveys out there, and really understanding what is right for your organization is quite a long process to begin with. In terms of is it worth having a bit more just in terms of that market exploration piece, how you did that, how you went around it,
Yeah.
in terms of narrowing that down, sort of shortlist process?
Yeah, and I do think actually in the buyer's guide that's connected with this webinar, there's lots of lists in there around what you might be looking for in your survey, and definitely use something like that to narrow it down and funnel it through. And to the point on stakeholder engagement, thinking about your stakeholders and the bits that they will be most interested in. So first time round, my stakeholders are really interested in automation. We were expanding really quickly, but we didn't want to expand significantly on our kind of workforce and headcount. We wanted to remain lean whilst we grew. So the automation and tech was a great pull at that point. So it does have a thought in mind about your business needs. We were expanding across Europe as well, so a provider that was able to support on the European perspective. So really building that list that's unique to you. It is tricky because the more providers you speak to, the more you can get overwhelmed. And Ross, sorry to say, at the end of the day, some of you guys are salespeople. So may promise quite a bit, and trying to get under the skin of that. And I've been thrilled to say with WorkBuzz, I got absolutely everything that was promised to me and more, actually. But that does become overwhelming when sales people are selling. So keep to your list. I think that really helps.
Yeah, I think often when working with sort of HR buyers across the industry, a clear defined list, often collated in some form of Excel sheet and scoring, really just helps you stick to the process of what you're looking for. So definitely a top tip from that perspective. And should we talk a little bit around the second journey and just how we did a bit of market exploration that time round?
Yeah. So that was quite different because I do love WorkBuzz and I really wanted to work with WorkBuzz. But we here have a brilliant in-house data team. And actually their main focus is not on our kind of people activity, it's on our customers and our partners experience. And then they support us on the side where they have the time. So we were running an in-house engagement survey that had good take-up as well. So this wasn't about trying to drive take-up, which is sometimes a good reason to work with an external provider. So I really had to think about selling the benefits of investing in an external provider when it worked fine in-house. So what we didn't have was an ED&I survey, and we hadn't done a huge amount on our ED&I journey. And we didn't have a huge amount of in-house specialism around ED&I survey questions from an internal people perspective. So it was a great opportunity for us to dip our toe in and for the business to engage with WorkBuzz, run a survey with WorkBuzz. And certainly I think that need for anonymity when completing an ED&I survey is even more, it's even more on people's mind. So again, to have that credence to saying this is with a external specialist provider helped, and it helped the business see what more you can get from an external specialist in surveys. And it freed up our in-house team to be able to deliver more of really what they're meant to be delivering for us as a business. So it worked quite well, but it was definitely a very different approach, and really, again, having to think about what were the requirements in-house for us that would help achieve buy-in and sign off.
Yeah, definitely. I think the two journeys are very different, and it comes back to that sort of market valuation piece, but in a very different way.
Yeah.
And even both of these journeys lean into what's important for me right now. And second time round was very, very different in terms of that whole EDI journey. And we'll come to sort of stakeholder buy-in shortly, but I think even in those two experiences were very, very different in terms of the types of people you're bringing on those journeys.
Yeah, absolutely. And, don't get me wrong, second time round, I still had to go through the due diligence. So I still had to speak with other providers, because you're going to struggle to get a proposal and a cost investment signed off unless you can prove that you have checked the market. And actually, it was good for me, because I have worked with WorkBuzz for a long time, and I'm very wedded to WorkBuzz. But sometimes it's good to just go, let me just check. Let's just see what else is out there, and what else is going on in the world. So I still did do a much shorter piece of research, but I did go to some of the other kind of well-known providers, and evidence that I'd done that due diligence as part of my recommendation to work with WorkBuzz.
Yeah, I think it's always important. You're always going to get asked from a HR leader's perspective or a people perspective, well, what's everybody else doing? How does this compare across the wider market?
Yeah.
So super important from that perspective. Shall we start to lean into building that business case a little bit more, and bringing those different stakeholders on the journey? So if we start first time round, where do you, or starting right from the start, let's talk about identifying your allies across there, and also identifying people that we need to bring on the journey with us.
Yeah. And I think first time round, well, I think both times round, the CEO is a key person to have on board, and generally CEOs are interested in engagement. It's an important marker for them, along with attrition, to make sure that the workforce is aligned, and we're all moving towards the same ultimate goals. So the CEO's buy-in is always important, and so understanding early on what their interest is in this helps. And it might be purely financial, or it might be something more, or it might be, as I say, that there was two different activities. The first time it was the new group vision, purpose and values. This time there was this gap around ED&I. So identifying what activity in the business is going to be your hook helps a lot. And this time the CEO, I haven't worked with him a full year yet, so I'm still learning his approach. So I did a soft walkthrough with him before I'd even put pen to paper on the proposal. So I said, this is what I'm thinking. Talk me through your thoughts, and almost just trying to capture his reservations and doubts. And then I came back to you, didn't I, Ross?
You did.
I was like, here they are. Here are the reservations. How can we work together on them? And that worked quite well.
Yeah, I think again from a buyer's perspective, working in line with those people that on those different platforms to understand, well, what are those reservations is so important. If you don't voice those, then we can't work on those together. And particularly from the CEO perspective, it links quite nicely to Jeff's question from the poll around, and maybe you've not been through this, but it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts, Di, around key stakeholders with a head in the sand approach. They think engagement's low, so they don't want to know about it.
Yeah.
How would you kind of approach that? How would you think about tackling that kind of question?
Yeah, and I think it's really highlighting the benefits of improving engagement. And sometimes you do need to get to that ROI of the cost impact of actually, with a more engaged workforce, this is what we can deliver from a cost perspective when you retain more people, and people are more motivated to deliver. So I think, yeah, it does happen where people are scared about engagement looking worse, or of receiving that feedback, but actually to share some case studies of where the opposite has happened, and also to show the benefit of improving engagement. And there's lots out there on that, and I'm sure you guys at WorkBuzz have plenty of literature as well that can help add lots of data around that.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll link back to some of it a little bit later on. But from case study perspective, we often find that influence and senior stakeholders, they want to see somebody that's been through the same journey, read the same book, and had the same outcomes. And sometimes those case studies are key, bringing not just the HR buyers, but also your stakeholders around you on that. And like you say, the benefits of engagement or improving engagement are well known by lots of people, but maybe others need educating on that. And there is so much internal content at WorkBuzz that we can share. There is so much external content from a number of reliable resources. So I guess my advice on this part would be, if it's around the benefits of improving engagement, have that open and honest conversation with someone. And there are so many resources out there to support that. So there's plenty of people willing to support that metric as well. In terms of building the business case, then let's drill down a little bit into, where do you start with it? How do you build? What do you include? And let's go into a few of those elements. I know it's one of the key responses on the poll for us.
Yeah, and I sometimes it's tricky because from a people or HR perspective, you probably have chosen a provider for some very core reasons, and those reasons might not be the hook for your key stakeholders. So whilst they may be the first thing that comes to your mind, you kind of have to put your shoes into the people that you need to get that sign off from, and ensure that you're front loading your proposal to show that you're actually answering what they need, rather than there may be other things. So for example, here, WorkBuzz is a massive admin saver for us, but that's not so much of a priority. So whilst I know my team are thrilled, and that's a great way for them to be brought in, it's not the key stakeholder need for buy-in. So really thinking about what you need to present, and parking some things, even though you think they're amazing yourself, but parking them if you know it's not going to help. And obviously the cost and that comparison against different providers, and highlighting the difference of what the offerings are. You become kind of well tuned because you've done the research, but you just have to remember that other people haven't done that research. And actually the providers themselves. So Ross, you share a really nice sort of table as part of the proposal that you send to me, and I absolutely shamelessly just copy and paste some of that straight in, because it's a really nice, clear representation of what you do get, and also what you don't get, depending on the package that you're choosing. So yeah, to remember that people won't have potentially done all the demos that you're doing. The exec summary, I think, is always really important and punchy at the start, to pull out those kind of key points that you want to smash across, in case people don't have a huge amount of time to go into the detail. And also being able to evidence that you've done your checks. So have you spoken to some customers who already work with WorkBuzz, or whatever your chosen provider is, speaking with others, and being able to evidence that you've got reassurance that others work with them and they work well. I think those customer reviews are always quite powerful.
Yeah, we spoke a little bit around previously, particularly if it's an initial journey, around speaking to existing clients. Typically from a buying perspective, people want to speak to people. I know particularly first time around, you did a bit of that with WorkBuzz as well.
Yeah, we really did. Because again, you don't quite know whether it is a sales pitch or whether it's genuine. People are very convincing. So actually speaking to a peer in a different business is really handy, and you do get that warts and all view, which is really what you want, and then you know what you're walking into. So yeah, I highly recommend that, and don't be afraid to ask either, because you guys at WorkBuzz are always really happy to kind of recommend people for me to speak to.
Yeah, I think that'll be consistent across all providers in terms of what should be being offered there. The other thing that sprung to mind as we were talking through there is all around timing. I know lots of HR personas will say, well, when's the best time to go and speak to my exec or whoever it might be? How do you position from a timing perspective? I assume there's no golden time to do so, but how do you time your business case presentations?
Yeah, I mean, there are some really obvious sort of stage points throughout your working year where budget planning happens, and obviously you want to get ahead of that. It's a bit pointless coming in straight after budget has been closed down for the year, for example. But again, this is somewhat a little bit of a judgment around those key stakeholders and the level of detail they need. For me, because I'm on the lazy side, I did that quite early. So before I put too much of the legwork in, but I know as well that's because I haven't got somebody who's going to ask me minutiae detailed questions. if I had somebody like that, I'd need to do a lot more of the groundwork before I first put the idea out there and gather the questions. But and doing the ED&I survey helped a huge amount, because I didn't even have to go through a huge amount of hoops, because it was a one-off survey that we introduced first off in response to a need, the fact that we needed to build our first ED&I strategy. So that was a really easy shoe-in for me, because that was a simple, quick sign-off of, yes, we know we need to do this, let's do it. You found a provider, great. So I already knew then, when I was putting the main proposal together, that there was a buy-in with WorkBuzz. People had liked the survey, they'd liked the information they'd seen, they liked how user-friendly the system was. People from across the business were like, oh, this is really good, can we do more of this? I'm like, maybe. So I think that really helped as a great try before you buy approach, and it definitely helped open the door for me second time round.
It makes a lot of sense in terms of the structure and thinking about the business case. You mentioned for some stakeholders avoid too much detail.
Yeah.
Any other sort of tips on how not to build a business case when it comes to either your exec team, CEO, FD, whoever it might be?
Yeah, I think you've got to put the numbers up there quite high. I mean, that's the crux if you're certainly in a private setting, commercial setting. And therefore, if you're putting the numbers up there, you want to get straight in with your return on investment, and make that really tangible. So my focus at the moment has been about attrition, and driving attrition down. So that was the one that I focused in on and showed how we'd be able to reduce attrition further with more rich data from the engagement surveys, and we're also doing the Leaver and New Starter surveys too. So I think really thinking about perhaps the one or two items that you're comfortable to commit to that you are going to reduce, and then looking at the saving around that, and that needs to be right up there with the cost investment.
Yeah, I think part of what it came down to when we were discussing, wasn't it, was knowing your audience, getting the timing right, getting the numbers right, the business case right. So that's all loops around really nicely on that. I think one of the areas might be good just to explore further is how you came about the numbers for the ROI, the attrition piece, and how we kind of worked on that together as well.
Yeah, well, you've got some useful calculators on your website.
It's a good start.
Yeah. So you can use the calculators, and I do always think, because again, there is a very easy challenge that comes back from CFOs, CEOs to go, yeah, but where did you get that number from? That's just a sort of made up number. So to be able to evidence the source of the logic, and confidently talk through the logic of, you know, if we save this many people from leaving, it's going to cost X amount, or save X amount. So that is really helpful, and certainly when you're looking at attrition, you can work that out quite quickly on, if you're looking at reducing by 3 or 4%, you can work out quite quickly then how many less people are going to be lost in the year, and what that translates to into savings. So, and then if you need to, sort of spelling out further, and when we're talking about saving, this is what we're saying it's not just about hiring costs, it's about the induction and onboarding and tech equipment investment, etc., blah blah blah. So it depends again on kind of the person, and perhaps how curious they are, or perhaps how mistrusting they are of what you're saying, as to how much detail you want to put in there.
Yeah, definitely. I think again, all comes back to knowing who you're speaking to, and it's interesting you bring the attrition piece, and it's naturally going to come back to CFO. How do we bring an FD, a CFO on that journey? And that's always going to come back to numbers, whereas some of the other stakeholders are going to be interested in different things. And one of the things I just want to loop back around on is how you brought the in-house data team around on that. So running surveys internally. Tell us a little bit around bringing them on the journey, a very different type of stakeholder as well.
Yeah, and it was interesting because being new into the business, I didn't really want to annoy any of my functions, and so sort of coming in and going, actually, I'd quite like to do this externally. Doesn't sound great. So I had to be quite careful and respectful, because they have a huge amount of knowledge in what they do. So I brought them on the journey and said, hey, we're looking at using an external provider. Just, again, using the ED&I survey on its own to start with. So I didn't really talk about any wider thoughts. I just used that ED&I survey that everybody recognised was a gap and a need, and they were pleased that we were looking at it. And so they were quite happy to sort of say, look, it's not really our area of specialism internally. So yeah, we understand. And because we do report on things like social impact for the learners and the employers in which they work for, let's share and let's see if there's something that you can gain from it to help with your surveys and reports that you provide. So there was definitely a positive there. And then knowing that they are the specialists in data, sharing the survey very early on, getting their thoughts on how do the questions look to you, how's the wording, sharing first sight of the platform because they use a very different type of platform. So again, for them to be able to see what's going on outside worked really well. So they were very much involved and on the journey with me. And so when we got to the point of actually getting that approval to move across to WorkBuzz for the main surveys, I think they were by that point thinking this might happen. And they were actually, I was worried about having the conversation, but they were actually quite pleased because they were like, oh, do you know what? We get a bit of time back. We can actually now focus a bit more on the day job. So, and we'll continue to share with them because they are specialists in-house, so it's worth doing that. But yeah, definitely bringing those people that you were a bit worried about on the journey with you rather than hiding it from them, I think does help.
Yeah, and for those on the call running internal surveys as well, one of the key elements that Guy worked really hard on, and bringing it back to the ROI piece that we had votes at the start of the call on, was well, what's the return on investment versus the cost of an external platform? And I know one of the things you did really well, Guy, was almost, well, you did exactly quantify this is the amount of time spent and this is how much broadly that might cost us internally. Do you want to talk through just a little bit around how you kind of went about bringing those figures together?
Yeah, so quite literally, when we ran the survey in-house in January, we had a little log going of who was doing all the work from the team around it, and made a note of how many hours that equated to, and then obviously just doubled that up for the year because we do our survey twice a year, and then translated that through based on salaries as to what the cost was as well as those hours. And the same for the data team, showing that actually look how much more we could provide for our customers, our partners, if they're not tied up supporting in-house. And again, for the team, what else could we be looking at if we're not spending a lot of time? And it was particularly around the reporting side. So that was incredibly manual for the team. And not just that, but the reports were nothing like as good as the reports that you can get at a click of a few buttons through WorkBuzz. So we were getting a kind of less of an output than we would do on WorkBuzz, and it was taking a huge amount of time. So to emphasize both those points just led it to be a bit of a no-brainer.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've worked with a number of organizations on how much time they actually are spending in-house working on that, and that can be pivotal part to the business case because it can be pound in, pound out comparative values.
Yeah, 100%.
We've been on for about 30 minutes or so. I'm conscious Di and I have done a lot of talking so far. I want to just give the audience and everybody here a chance to either drop any questions into the Q&A, anything into the chat that you'd like us to perhaps deep dive on, recover, anything like that, before we come to more of the top tips and sort of a final summary, which will cover for perhaps the last sort of 5 to 10 minutes or so. So please feel free to have a minute or so, drop any questions in the chat, any questions around ROI, stakeholder journeys, building the business case. Please drop them in now. We'll give you, I don't know, 30 seconds to a minute, and then come to almost the summary of top tips from Di and spend the last sort of 5 minutes on that or so. And give me a chance to have a drink of water as we go through.
Well, maybe we just answered all the questions as we've got.
Well, hopefully. I think I went back to the what we're looking to cover today in terms of defining needs, whether it's fresh or existing, bringing leadership on the journey with you. And I think we've got some really key points around that. Finding the allies in your organization, we covered that from particularly the second journey with your CEO, not being too long in role yourself, and the in-house data team. We've got a question from Eleanor. Where did you experience resistance, and how did you address it? So leaning more into those challenges, both particularly, let's start from a first journey and from a second journey, because I know you've had different resistance, shall we say, on both those journeys.
Yeah, so I think the first journey, the resistance was around rigidity of external providers. So certainly some of these big ones where awards are attached to them, they're very rigid in the questions and the kind of the data sets and the outputs. And there was a concern about wanting to be more fluid and adaptable than some of the big providers. So I just made sure that I just didn't present providers that did that, and WorkBuzz are very fluid, and will pretty much kind of work to your needs. So some of it is you just got to accept if there are some key things that will be resisted, you may as well just not fight that fight sort of thing. So it's kind of deciding what battles you're going to fight over. On both occasions, I was lucky I didn't have point blank resistance. Second time round, the resistance was very much we're doing something in-house, therefore we're managing that cost. Now you're asking for money to do something outside, so having to really display that value add and the impact of working with WorkBuzz. That was really important because we were already doing something in-house. So yeah, it's definitely worth trying to identify those areas of resistance really early on, for sure, and then working around them.
Yeah, I agree. And I think knowing different stakeholders across organizations, some of those other resistance areas that we come up against are confidentiality.
Yeah.
Always a key one, whether you want to run something in-house, externally. And that resistance might be from all of your employees in the first place. It might be from execs. So you've got very different groups to manage when it comes to that confidentiality. Do you want to mention, just in terms of communicating the survey and the confidentiality aspect, how that's helped, I know particularly at previous organizations, just build confidence within the survey?
Yeah, 100%. I think linking to the confidentiality promise and choosing when you're going to use the provider's brand as well is quite important, because then actually people do recognize it's an external provider. That helps a lot. So really choosing when to emphasize that you're working in partnership with another provider. And again, because our managers have access to the platform, we're sort of really open and we're like, go ask your manager, you can go and have a look at the platform yourself, and it just breaks down any concerns about what can the manager see and what can't they see, and the numbers within the data sets, and again how you don't see small numbers of people's feedback to protect the anonymity, just making sure that's really emphasized.
Yeah.
So there's a lot actually that WorkBuzz do to help emphasize the anonymity. So I think it's just leveraging what you guys put out there and making sure that that's really clear who you're working with on all your communication on the run up to the survey.
Yeah, I agree. And I think bringing it back to the business case element, I work with lots of HR buyers bringing IT directors or similar on that journey.
Yeah.
And for them, it's all about preempting those questions that are going to be around network security, where's the data held, etc. And if you speak with people, they'll have all the answers ready made for you. So for me, that resistance is just about asking the question early doors, as you mentioned, Di.
Yeah, it's that's good old GDPR as well, and often they're just looking for that tick and to make sure that you've looked at it, you've checked it, we're good. That's usually quite a quick one to head off, actually. Yeah.
Cool. If anybody has any final questions before we move to summary and top tips, please feel free to drop them in. If not, I'm going to ask Hayley Preedy, our host, who's hiding off camera, to pull up our final slide, and then just ask Di to talk through the last 4 or 5 points for 4 or 5 minutes or so. So we've got webinar recording and resources coming up. One of the things we were speaking about was just around the top tips from there, sounding out those ideas with senior leaders, budget, scope, possibilities before approaching external providers, competitor comparison, consultative approach as well. Let these people help you build the business case. I think that one has come through key die through here as well, and take a wider look at those referral calls, etc., in different pieces as well. Any other sort of top tips to add to the final takeaway for today for the last 2 or 3 minutes?
Well, I think just going back to that list of needs and requirements at the start, that's critical, getting that list right and then sticking to your list. So think about who else you might want to help shape that list, and that also may help get those stakeholders involved early. So sending that round and getting people to add or comment on the wish list from the providers is really useful. And aside from that, I think we didn't do a huge amount of kind of working with managers because we just let them try the system when we did the ED&I survey. In my first place, we did do a bit of a what should we call this survey, and people were involved in the name of the survey. So that helped generate buy-in, and everybody felt that they were involved through that. So yeah, I suppose just thinking about how you want to generate everybody's buy-in with the whole process of the fact that you are going to be doing something different with your surveys is helpful.
No, we'd earmarked about 40 minutes or so we have got a minute left, but I think the key points for me to take away were who and how shaping those key priorities and scope. Who do you need to bring on that journey with you and doing it early doors? A competitor comparison, like you say, there's lots of salespeople out there, but how do you align that to your scope and really make sure you're getting a focused solution? A key part around the due diligence. We just spoke around bringing IT directors, etc., CFOs on the journey, making sure you've had those referral calls, looked at those NPS scores in different areas as well. And a key one you've touched on, and lots around the ROI piece, knowing your numbers that sit behind that. So if it is a CEO that isn't convinced that they want to look at engagement, how do you prove and build that business case as well? So this time I'm going to ask Hayley Preedy to bring the final slide up, and I'll just talk through that through our final minute or so. Or anything to add before we finalise, Di?
No, I'm all good, thank you.
So yeah, thank you very much all for watching. WorkBuzz team will be in touch early next week. We will send out a recording of this and a supporting ebook. If you do have your mobile or tablet handy, please feel free to scan the QR code. I will also say I'm happy to jump on a call, answer any questions, or deep dive on any of this. And I promise that Di did say this before the call as well. She is also happy. If anybody wants to talk around building business case one-to-one with Di, even have a look at some of the stuff she's done in the past, please feel free to contact Di directly. We will share details, etc., if you want to do so. But to finalize, a big thank you to everybody that has either joined or is watching this after the recording has been sent out. But thank you very much all for joining today.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much all. Take care.